Hi, and welcome to our next story about the strange and bloody history of the Peak District. We first came across this story from our initial look at the area for ghostly happenings.
Wardlow Mires is found on the A623, sort of between Castleton and Bakewell. The place you are looking for is Peter's Stone, which is a bit off the beaten track, but as you can see is well worth visiting. Please note, parking is pretty limited. So why did it attract our interest? Well, it is meant to be a pretty haunted place. So much so that people would not go there after dark. It is also said to be the last gibbet in Derbyshire. So that's 2 boxes ticked. Throw in the fact that we have a murder story, red shoes, and an extraordinary pub that looks like it could stand in for the slaughtered lamb from American Werewolf in London, and what's not to love. As always, the truth isn't really like the legend, and we have seen a lot of conflicts in the law versus newspaper reporting. We are going to present verified information from 100 years worth of newspaper reporting on this.
Right, let's start with the red shoes. My mum used to warn me about red shoes, which probably explains my fascination with them and lots of other things that we won't go into right now. Moving swiftly on, in Wardlow there was a turnpike, which was basically a toll booth and a barrier that travellers had to pay to pass through. A bit like the M6 toll road, but probably without the service stations.
Around 1810, this turnpike was operated by a widow by the name of Hannah Oliver. The first thing to get straight was that this widow wasn't an older woman, as some people have described her. Hannah Oliver was around the age of 45, and if some ports are to be believed, liked to have a fun time. Track down the perambulations of Barney the Irishman for more details. In my mind, she was a MILF.
Okay. One day, Hannah got a pair of red shoes, specially made for her by a cobbler in a local village called Stony Middleton. Now, this cobbler had a bit of an odd practice of placing a scroll containing some scripture inside the shoe. As it turns out, this bit is crucial, but it's still a bit weird. But remember that bit. Hannah had lovely red shoes, and I can imagine her operating the turnpike wearing her shoes and drawing attention to the fact that she was wearing them, waiting for someone to say, "Oh, those are lovely shoes, Hannah, are they new?" There's no point having shoes like that if you don't have people noticing them, is there?
On a cold morning in January 1815, there was a great commotion outside of the turnpike as a barrier was down, and there was no one around to open the gate. From reports, the barmaid from a local pub went into the house and found Hannah dead. The points that everyone seems to agree on is she was strangled, and money and other items, including her shoes, were missing. The bits that aren't mentioned widely, apart from a couple of newspaper reports, is that she was tied to a chair and her head was fastened back. Put this way, it looks more like a robbery gone wrong than a straightforward murder. It is also reported that she had a relationship with a murderer and she used to give him money, and it was when she stopped doing this that the murder happened.
On with the story. In the local village there was a young woman who was pregnant, and she was visited soon after the murder by the child's father with some gifts and a proposal. The gifts included money and a pair of red shoes, and the proposal was the usual thing of blaming the child on another poor lad. It seems that she agreed to this and skipped off with her new shoes and some cash, probably to break the news of fatherhood to some unsuspecting bloke in the village. I don't know the name of the girl involved, but the lad was called Anthony Lingard, and he was aged 21. News soon caught up with the girl about the murder of the widow in the turnpike and the missing red shoes. At this point, she must have put 2 and 2 together and decided to return the shoes to Anthony Lingard pretty sharpish. He tried to talk his way out of this by saying that he had swapped a pair of stockings for them, but she was having none of it, and Anthony was left holding the baby, as it were.
Eventually, the law caught up with Anthony Lingard, and he was arrested and put on trial for the murder of Hannah Oliver in Derby Assizes. I have seen numerous accounts of how he got arrested, ranging from the girl actually dobbing him in to a possibly better story of her being seen wearing the shoes, and when she was questioned about it, she blamed Anthony Lingard for giving them to her. What does seem to be clear is that she and the cobbler were both witnesses for the prosecution. The cobbler proved that the shoes were Hannah's because, remember the bit earlier, he told the court to look in the shoes for the parchment. They did, and found a piece of paper which bore the words "Commit no crimes" hidden in them. Finding him guilty, Lingard was sentenced to death by hanging in Derby, and from all accounts eventually came to terms with his fate and even forgave the girl for basically turning him in and being the witness against him. I don't think I would have. The judge, before leaving, added one more kick in the crotch by declaring that after his death, Lingard's body should be hung in a spot close to the location where the murder had been committed. I suppose that being hung is bad enough news, but somehow being told that your body is meant to hang from a pole has a little bit more of a sting.
Lingard was hung in Derby, and his body was conveyed to Wardlow Mires to be put in the gibbet. At this point, I think I need to highlight the cost of all this. To me, we are in the times that a few pence was a weekly wage, and families sat down for a Sunday lunch of an enormous turnip or something. This whole investigation, court, hanging and gibbet thing cost over 100 quid. 100 quid. It cost 10 quid just to move the body from Derby to Wardlow. One reason for the gibbet was that really they were massively popular. Literally thousands of people turned up to see it. They had Punch and Judy stalls, hog roasts, everything for a fun day out for all the family. This gibbet was so popular that the local minister is reported to have given up holding his sermon in his empty local church and instead started preaching from the top of the mound. If they had charged people, then perhaps there won't have been 100 quid out of pocket.
The draw of the gibbet was strong. There are loads of newspapers with letters to the editor saying, "When I was a lad, my dad used to take me to the gibbet. I always wondered what the bloke's crime was." The other reason for a gibbet was that they were meant to be a deterrent to others. I will leave the medicinal purposes of a gibbet for a later video.
The plan didn't work if you take these two examples into account. Hannah Bocking was a 16-year-old girl who by all accounts had a dark personality. She was insanely jealous of another young girl in the village by the name of Jane Grant, who lived with Hannah's grandfather-in-law as a servant. This seems to have annoyed Hannah, as for some reason she had been turned away from that family in the past. Hannah decided to do away with Jane by poisoning her and so obtained arsenic and baked it into a cake. She gave the cake to the girl as part of a trip out to pick flowers and to see the cows in the field, where the gibbet with the remains of Anthony Lingard was still swinging in the breeze. The girl ate the cake and died soon after, but not before putting the blame on Hannah. Hannah was arrested and tried in Derby, found guilty and was hung, one of the youngest people to be executed in the country. The next tale of the lack of impact involves the younger brother of Anthony Lingard, who almost followed his brother with a sentence of death following being arrested on a charge of highway robbery. I say almost because I can find the record of the death sentence, but no history of it being carried out. Some say that he was transported to the colonies, where, from all accounts, he carried on being a bit of a bad lad.
Another small note about the crime, highway robbery, conjures up the vision of Dick Turpin and coaches being robbed, dancing in the moonlight with pretty damsels. Well, it wasn't that. Basically, he and his friend robbed a bloke coming out of a pub. And as it was near a road, it was classed as highway robbery. How much did he steal, I hear you say, for him to be hung for such a crime? 2 quid. I think the only thing that shocked me more was finding out that someone's been hung for bestiality just after him. Now I bet that guy was embarrassed on so many levels. Some more bonus facts about gibbets. Firstly, there is a report that when the gibbet was finally taken down and his remains removed, somebody wrote to the papers reporting that Auntie Lingard's skull ended up in Bellevue, Manchester. I've also seen that confirmed in a scientific paper. I have a fascination with Bellevue from when I was a child, and also some form of compulsion that makes me want to find the final resting place of those who investigate. I will find out more, and maybe we'll be able to do a video about Bellevue's macabre history.
It seems that the common practice was to cover the bodies in tar before popping them into the gibbet to make them last longer. That didn't work out too well for 3 bodies hanging in Chevin near Duffield, as one night someone set fire to the tar-covered remains and the villagers were given the spectacle of 3 giant tar candles burning throughout the night. It is said that the tar burned so well that only the chains remained when the fire went out. Usually you were dead when you went to the gibbet, but this wasn't always the case. In Baslow, near Bakewell, there lived an old woman who was minding her own business, cooking some bacon for her breakfast in a pan, when a beggar asked her for some spare hot fat. She responded that she had none spare for the likes of him, which angered him, and shouting, "You have it all then," he killed her by pouring the hot fat down her throat. This crime was considered so horrible, it was decided to sentence him to be gibbeted alive. He was left in a gibbet to die, and had nearly done so when the story goes that a baker passed by the gibbet and offered him some bread. This seems to have had 2 impacts. It revived the poor sod and started a series of wails and screams so great that the local earl heard them and got an Act of Parliament passed to stop live gibbeting ever happening again. The other impact was that the poor baker had to flee the village, if not the country. There is a moral here. I think it's don't give your bread to someone in a gibbet.
So, let's recap. We have a murder, red shoes, strange pub, a hanging and a gibbet. What are we missing? Oh yes, the ghosts, which, let's face it, was the main reason we started all this. Okay, ghosts and the Wardlow gibbet. You're gonna hate me, so if you like ghost stories, don't listen to this bit. Put your fingers in your ears and I will tell you when to listen again. The ghost story aspect is twofold. There were noises from the location which upset people. The noises were described as like a wind, wailing or creaking metal. Well, it's a dead body in a basket made of metal. It's gonna make noise while it's up. And from what I can see, it was in place for over 8 years following the crime. The other bit is that at night people were scared by a space of spooky happenings, which involved them having something splashed in their face or hearing scary noises. That sounded hopeful, until I found a report in the 1920s which has these jolly japes being attributed to bored locals looking for a bit of fun, and this activity happened at lots of gibbet locations. It must be true what they say about the devil finding work for idle hands. Right, ghost followers, you can listen again. I think that's covered everything apart from the X-Files or the Cyril Fletcher bit.
There are lots of prehistoric areas around the peaks. but Wardlow seems to have been a special place in its time. While building the toll road that started all this, the workmen discovered one of the most important barrows ever found in the UK, and indeed I believe only 3 of these have ever been uncovered. The barrow contained 17 skeletons, arranged in a sort of spoke arrangement, circling a central stone area. The bodies were placed on large flat stones, and in the centre there was a long chest with 2 other bodies in it. The coffins were 2 feet deep and nearly 8 feet long. Remember that bit. Later, someone called Bateman excavated another barrow, known locally as Rolling Hill. When they opened this barrow, they found 2 urns and 3 skeletons in oblong coffins. Now these skeletons were of a, and I quote, great dimension and gigantic stature. One of the skeletons was in a sitting position.
I have purchased his 2 books cataloguing his finds. I'll be wading through them to see if there's any mention of an 8-foot astronaut. Of course, I am now convinced that Wardlow was actually an alien colony, starting by Ridley Scott's engineers from the Alien series, and the skeleton that was found sitting up was actually the jockey pilot from the first Alien film.
And that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe, and if you'd like to leave a comment, we would love to hear from you.